Hello everyone, my name is Mario Tiozzo and I'm the Data Analysis and Visualization Librarian here at UNB Libraries. Sometimes you may come across missing values that you want to retroactively fill in. Today we'll explore a few ways to do this using Excel functionality. Additionally, we'll see how to create a process to ensure that the data that you enter is always consistent. Here we have a dataset I created about a fictional list of students which is constituted of student ID, email, country, and province. You'll notice that a few of the email addresses are missing. The entire country field is missing, and a few of the province cells are also missing. Let's fix these one at a time. Let's start with the email addresses. After a little examination of the email addresses, we can see that it's simply the student ID followed by @unb.ca. We can use a few formulas we've already seen before, as well as the if formula in order to fill this out. It's always a good idea to keep the original data in some fashion, so in this instance, let's try to optimize the original data in a set of columns nearby. I'll just come over here, copy the titles, and paste them over here. Perfect. There's nothing wrong with the student ID, so let's simply link to the original source. Over here, equals, let's just drag this all the way down. Great. Now we want to keep the original email value if it exists, but if it's blank, we want to fix it. We can use the if formula to get us started. The if formula looks for a predefined criterion that we establish. Then it takes one action if that criterion is met and another action if it isn't. We do this by going to an empty cell. Let's go over here, pressing the equal sign, the name of the formula, if, open the parenthesis. We see that there are three arguments: the logical test, the value if true, and the value if false. Let's write this to set the criterion. B2 here is equal to double quotation mark. A double quotation mark with nothing inside basically means a blank cell. So basically we're saying for our criterion to be when cell B2 is blank. We press a comma to go to the next argument. Now the argument is value if true. What do we want to happen if the value of this is true, if B2 is blank? Well, we want to recreate the email address. So we do this with the concatenate function, which we've seen in another video. So we'll type it in. In this case, I'll use the formula concat, which does the same thing as concatenate. Open the parenthesis. So the structure of the email is that it's the student ID, and then the next argument, so we'll put a comma, the next argument is @umb.ca in text. So we tell Excel that it's text by putting quotation marks around it. So we put first quotation mark @unb.ca, close a quotation mark, close a parenthesis. Then we press the comma to move on to the next argument. Now it's the value if false argument. So what do we want to happen if it's false? So if it's not blank. Well, if it's not blank, we want it to return the original email address. So back to cell B2. Close the parenthesis and we press enter. We can see that the email address has been returned, but it was never blank to begin with. So let's just test it. What if it was to be blank? If we delete this for a second, we do get the email address, but we notice that the letters before the @ symbol are in capital letters. And that's not what we want in order to be consistent. We want it to all be in lowercase. Okay, so let's just Control Z to get our email address back. And since we want to keep the same formatting across the board, let's wrap the entire formula with a lower formula, which will put everything in lowercase text. We saw the lower formula in a previous video if you want a refresher. So we'll just put it over here and we'll put lower, open the parenthesis, go all the way to the end of the formula, close the parenthesis to close out the lower. Now if we delete this, everything's in lowercase, which is great. Control Z again to get the original data back. This is a pretty complex formula. We have an if formula that includes a concatenate formula, and the entire thing is wrapped in a lower formula. Hopefully how we constructed it makes sense to you and you can see the logic behind it. With some practice, you will become more comfortable creating these types of nested formulas. Just start with one element, then build on it if the situation requires to add more complexity. Now that we are satisfied with our formula, we can go to the bottom right corner of the cell, double click on it, and Excel will drag the formula all the way to the bottom of the previous column's data. Double click here just to check. Yep, works great. Next, let's try to resolve the missing data in a province column. Unlike the email column example, where we could rationalize what the missing value should be, here we simply do not know what to put in the blank spaces. When that is the case, it's sometimes fine to leave it blank. Sometimes you want to replace it with something else, either a 0 or text or another value altogether. Here, let's replace it with text. We could use the if formula to do this again, but let's try something else to show you another way to tackle this problem. Let's copy and paste the original data into column I. Here, Control C, Control V. Great. Now with our data highlighted, let's press Control G. Let's go to Special. Let's click on Blanks and press OK. Now all the blanks are highlighted. I want the blanks to be replaced with the string n/a-missing. So that's what I'm going to put in. n/a space dash space missing. And I'll press Control Enter to have this apply to all the highlighted blanks. Now all the highlighted blanks have n/a-missing. Let's move on to the missing data in the country column. We would like to fill in Canada anytime there is a Canadian province, and when the province starts with an n/a, we would want the country that follows the n/a to be used in the country field. To do so, we will use the XLOOKUP formula, which will effectively be used as a find replace function. Before we do that though, we will need to build a lookup table so that the XLOOKUP formula knows what to find and what to replace. We could build one manually, but let's use some formulas to create one. We can use the sort and unique formulas to create a sorted array of all the values in the province field. I'll do this quickly since we already covered this in previous video. I'll go here, equals sort, open parenthesis, unique, open parenthesis, and we'll take our province field, close a parenthesis for unique and close a parenthesis for sort. Perfect. Now we'll tag it, lookup data. Great. So this is what the formula will be looking for. Every time it comes across Alberta, for example, it will refer it to something. Let's put that something in the next column. To do this, let's use the if, left, and text after formulas. In the interest of time, I'll just write the formula quickly. This is an if formula. The criteria is that the first 3 characters of the data should be n/a. If this is true, then the formula should use the text after the dash and space. All of our n/a have the same structure so that we can do this. If the first 3 characters are not n/a, then put Canada. We can now double click at the bottom of the cell to drag this down. Great. Let's tag it, return data. Great. So let's use our XLOOKUP formula now to build out our country column. We'll go to the first instance of country here, press equal, XLOOKUP, open the parenthesis. We notice that the formula requires 3 arguments: the lookup value, the lookup array, and the return array, as well as some optional arguments which we will cover later. So the lookup value is what we're looking for. In this case, it's the provincial data point in I2. We put a comma there to move to the next argument. The lookup array is the column that XLOOKUP is going to search for to match that provincial data point. So that's our lookup data column. Let's make sure to put absolute values around it. Press the comma again to let Excel know that we're moving to the next argument. The return array is a column that XLOOKUP is going to return if it finds a match. So this is the country data column. Let's make sure that we put absolute values around that as well. It's important that the size of the lookup array and the return array are the same. So here they both start at row 2 and end at row 20. If there's a mismatch, the formula will not work. Okay, close a parenthesis and press enter. It returns Canada. So far, so good. Before we keep going, let's take a look at the optional arguments for XLOOKUP. The if not found argument. If Excel can't find the lookup value in the lookup array, it will return a number n/a error. Sometimes you may want to return something else, like another string, such as, quote, not found, unquote, or a number like 0, and you could include that here. The match mode argument. This specifies the match mode Excel will take. 0 is a default, and it's looking for an exact match, and if it is not found, it will return a number n/a error. If you put -1, it's also an exact match, but if it's not found, it will return the next smaller item. If you put 1, it's also an exact match, but if it's not found, it will return the next larger item. And if you put a 2, it's a wildcard match, where you can use the question mark to replace a single character and an asterisk to replace any number of characters or a string of characters. Finally, the search mode argument. The most popular setups here are 1, which is the default, and it performs the search starting from the first item. and -1, which performs the search starting from the last item. This setup works well for us, so we won't need to use any optional arguments this time. Just like before, we can go to the bottom right corner of the cell, double-click on a square, and Excel will auto-populate the rest of the data series. Great. Now this is dynamic. So if we were to find out that the missing value in I-13 right over here is Ontario, you could change that to Ontario, and the lookup formula would now search for Ontario and return Canada. It's important to note that there are other lookup formulas in Excel, mainly VLOOKUP and to a lesser extent HLOOKUP. These formulas have been superseded by XLOOKUP, but they are still being used and you may come across them. They follow mostly the same syntax as XLOOKUP. Let's look at an example. Just go over here, type in VLOOKUP, open the parenthesis. There is a lookup value just like in XLOOKUP. So here, let's say we pick Ontario as the lookup value, comma. Instead of a lookup array and a return array, however, it has a table and a column index number. So the table would be the entire field, including the array data and the return data, comma, and the column index number would be the number column of the return array. In this case, it would be 2, so I would hard code 2 and close a parenthesis, which would return Canada. VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP are not as flexible as XLOOKUP, however, nor do they have as many useful optional arguments. So I would recommend using XLOOKUP when you want to look up a value. There you go. On the left-hand side, we have our original data with the missing values, and on the right-hand side, we have our new data set that is fully filled out. Before I go, I'd like to quickly chat about data validation. It's a technique that's used to ensure that you and whoever has access to your data enters it properly according to the criteria you established. Let's quickly go over an example. Here you see the valid provincial entries that are appropriate on this spreadsheet. Whoever enters provincial values should only enter them in this exact configuration. For example, we wouldn't write PEI for Prince Edward Island, nor would we write Alberta in all lowercase, or Ontario erroneously with 2 R's. To do this, let's go to a cell. Let's go to the bottom of the set here. Let's click on the Data tab at the top of the spreadsheet. Let's go to the Data Validation button, and let's click on Data Validation. Here we have a drop-down menu of what we would like to allow. We have a lot of choices, but we're going to pick lists for this example. We could input our list manually in this source box, Alberta, comma, British Columbia, comma, etc., etc. But let's just highlight the field that we are interested in. Let's click in the source box. Move this. Let's highlight the field that we want. We can go a bit lower here if we think that this field has room to grow in the future. On the next tab, Input Message, we could put a message that will be highlighted when the user scrolls over the cell. For this example, I'm not going to put anything here. On the Error tab, we can write a message if the user makes an error, something like this. Title, something like this, or the message, press OK. Let's go to the bottom here and check out what that looks like. You can see that there's a drop-down menu here. All the entries in our list are now available. And if I start typing, they get automatically auto-populated to the restricted entries. So let's say I want New Brunswick, I can press Tab, and there you go. I could also drag this out, so now all these cells have the same data validation. And if I were to enter an incorrect entry, I would get the error title and the error text that I put in when I constructed my data validation. This way, all our entries will be standardized. Okay, that should do it for now. We've learned different ways to deal with missing values in our dataset, as well as how to standardize our entries so that they are always consistent no matter who enters them. I hope that this was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.